Pick up your glasses, genius, or crawl for them. Bryce Carter's voice echoed across the school courtyard, loud enough to silence hundreds of students enjoying their lunch break. A pair of black-framed glasses skidded across the concrete, spinning twice before stopping beside a rainwater puddle. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then laughter erupted. Some students laughed because they thought it was funny. Others laughed because they were relieved it wasn't happening to them. Malik Johnson stood perfectly still in the middle of the crowded courtyard, his backpack hanging from one shoulder, his notebook pressed tightly against his chest. Without his glasses, the faces around him blurred into a sea of moving shapes and distorted colors. He could hear the laughter, but he could no longer tell who was laughing. Bryce took another step forward. 6'3", captain of the football team. The kind of teenager teachers praised for his athletic scholarships while pretending not to notice the fear that followed him through the hallways. He nudged the glasses with the toe of his expensive sneakers. "They're over here," he said with a grin. Then he kicked them farther away. The courtyard exploded with another wave of laughter. A girl near the cafeteria looked away. A freshman lowered his head. Even two teachers standing outside the administration building hesitated before returning to their conversation, convincing themselves that boys would always be boys. Malik slowly inhaled. The cool autumn air carried the smell of damp leaves and freshly cut grass across the campus. Somewhere behind the gymnasium, the marching band rehearsed for Friday night's football game, their distant drums beating steadily against the rhythm of his heart. He could have shouted. He could have cursed. Instead, he quietly placed his notebook on the ground. Then, with calm movements that almost looked rehearsed, he knelt onto one knee. The concrete felt cold beneath his palm. His fingers searched carefully across the pavement until they touched the bent frame of his glasses. Before he could pick them up, Bryce planted his sneaker directly on top of them. Crunch. The tiny sound barely reached anyone else's ears. To Malik, it sounded like something inside his chest had cracked. Bryce leaned down until their faces were only inches apart. "You spend all day reading books," he sneered. "You know what's funny?" He paused just long enough for the crowd to lean in. "No book is ever going to teach you how to stand up to someone like me." A few students exchanged uneasy glances. One boy quietly whispered, "Come on, Bryce. That's enough." Bryce didn't even look at him. Instead, he grabbed Malik's backpack, ripped it from his shoulder, and dumped everything onto the concrete. Books, pens, a half-finished science project, several carefully folded worksheets. One by one, they scattered across the wet pavement. The wind caught loose pages and carried them through the courtyard like white birds trying to escape. Someone in the crowd pulled out a phone. Another student started recording. Bryce smiled wider. "Let's make the school genius famous." The circle around them grew larger. More students arrived. Whispers spread from table to table. Bryce found another victim. It's Malik. The quiet black kid. The nerd. The one who never fights back. Malik remained kneeling. He carefully picked up each soaked page before placing it back inside his torn backpack. His movements were slow, patient, deliberate. Not once did he raise his voice. Not once did he look angry. That silence irritated Bryce more than any insult ever could. He reached down, grabbed Malik by the front of his hoodie, and yanked him to his feet. "If you're so smart," Bryce shouted, making sure everyone could hear, "why don't you fight me?" The courtyard became deathly still. Even the band in the distance seemed to disappear. Malik finally lifted his eyes. His expression wasn't frightened. It wasn't angry. It was almost sorrowful, as though he felt sorry for the boy standing in front of him. Bryce mistook that look for weakness. He laughed. "So that's it? I knew it. You're just a coward." Malik's lips parted for the first time. His voice was so quiet that only Bryce could hear it. "I've spent years learning that fighting is the last thing a martial artist should ever want." Bryce frowned. "What did you say?" Malik gently removed Bryce's hand from his hoodie. Then he picked up his broken glasses, slipped them into his pocket, turned around, and walked away. The crowd believed they had just watched another helpless victim surrender. No one standing in that courtyard realized they had just mocked the youngest regional karate black belt champion in the state. And, before the final school bell rang, Bryce Carter was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. The final bell hadn't rung yet, but the whispers had already spread through every hallway. The nerd got humiliated again. Bryce destroyed his glasses. Did you see him? He didn't even fight back. By the time Malik Johnson walked into his last class, dozens of students had already watched the video circulating through their phones. Some smirked. Others avoided looking at him altogether. A few genuinely felt sorry for him. Malik simply walked to the back corner of the classroom, placed his worn backpack beside his desk, and opened his physics notebook as if nothing had happened. The cracked lenses resting inside his pocket made reading difficult, but he never complained. His teacher, Mrs. Reynolds, noticed immediately. "Malik, your glasses?" He offered a small smile. "I'll fix them after school." She wanted to ask more. Instead, she quietly nodded. She had taught for nearly 20 years. She knew the look of a child carrying burdens too heavy for his age. 3 hours later, school buses slowly pulled away from Jefferson High as the afternoon sun painted long golden shadows across the parking lot. Most students rushed home. Malik didn't. He walked nearly 2 miles through quiet neighborhoods until he reached a modest brick house with peeling white paint and a small vegetable garden in the front yard. The mailbox leaned slightly to one side. The porch creaked under every step. It wasn't much, but it was home. Before opening the front door, Malik glanced through the living room window. His little sister, Zoe, sat cross-legged on the carpet coloring a picture with broken crayons. The moment she saw him, her face lit up. "Malik." She ran across the room and wrapped both arms around his waist. "You're late." "I know. Did the science club keep you again?" Malik hesitated. "Something like that." She looked up at him with the innocent certainty only a 9-year-old could have. "You forgot your smile today." He laughed softly. "You always notice." "I always will." Behind them, the kitchen timer rang. Their mother emerged wearing faded blue scrubs, exhaustion written across her face after another 12-hour hospital shift. Angela Johnson was a night shift nurse. She often worked overtime simply to keep the lights on. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes, yet the first thing she did was hug both of her children. "How was school?" Malik answered automatically. "It was fine." His mother studied him for a moment. She had raised him alone since his father passed away 8 years earlier. She knew every tiny change in his voice. She noticed the torn backpack, the dirt on his sleeves, the faint scrape across his knuckles. Most importantly, she noticed the missing glasses. "Malik, what happened?" He tried to wave it away. "They broke." "How?" "I dropped them." Angela didn't believe him. Not for 1 second. But she also knew forcing the truth out of him wouldn't help. She simply placed a warm hand on his shoulder. "We'll find a way to replace them." Malik immediately shook his head. "No. You need the money for Zoe's asthma medicine." The room fell quiet. His mother looked away, pretending to stir the soup simmering on the stove. They both knew he was right. A new pair of prescription glasses would have to wait. After dinner, while Zoe finished her homework, Malik disappeared into the detached garage behind the house. It looked nothing like a dojo. Old wooden shelves lined the walls. A rusted bicycle leaned against a toolbox. Dust floated through beams of evening sunlight pouring in through cracked windows. Yet in the center of the concrete floor stood one object that transformed the space completely. A perfectly maintained karate mat. Beside it rested an old black belt, carefully folded. A faded framed photograph hung on the wall. In it, a younger Malik stood beside his grandfather, Samuel Johnson. Both wore white GIs. Both smiled proudly. Samuel had once been one of the most respected karate instructors in the state. Long before arthritis weakened his legs, he had taught hundreds of students. But to Malik, he had taught something far more important than punches and kicks. As if summoned by memory itself, the old garage door creaked open. Grandfather Samuel entered slowly with the help of a polished wooden cane. His silver hair caught the orange glow of sunset. His sharp eyes immediately landed on Malik's bruised hand. He didn't ask who had hit him. He asked something else. Did you protect your temper? Malik lowered his head. Yes, sir. Samuel smiled with quiet pride. Good. He walked to the center of the mat and gently placed the folded black belt into Malik's hands. You earned this years ago. But every single day, you must earn it again. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. Inside the garage, silence settled between grandfather and grandson. It wasn't an empty silence. It was the kind that carried wisdom. Then Samuel looked directly into Malik's eyes and said the words that had shaped his entire life. A black belt is not proof that you can defeat another person. He paused. It is proof that you have learned how to defeat the anger inside yourself. Malik tightened his grip on the belt. He had no idea those words were about to be tested more severely than ever before. Because at that very moment, only a few blocks away, Bryce Carter and his friends were already planning what they would do to him after school the next day. Bryce Carter had never been told no for very long. From the moment he entered Jefferson High, the football field had become his kingdom. Every Friday night, the stadium erupted when his name echoed through the loudspeakers. Teachers praised his leadership on the field. Local newspapers called him the future of college football. Parents shook his father's hand after every game, congratulating him on raising such a fine young man. Only the students who walked the hallways with him every day knew the truth. The applause ended when the stadium lights went dark. Behind the smiles, Bryce ruled through intimidation. He didn't punch people every day. He didn't have to. Fear was far more effective. One mocking comment in the cafeteria. A shoulder slammed into someone's locker. A backpack mysteriously thrown into a trash can. A cruel nickname repeated often enough that everyone else joined in. Little by little, people learned that staying silent was safer than standing up. By senior year, most students simply stepped aside whenever Bryce approached. Not because they respected him, because they were afraid of becoming his next target. That evening, Bryce sat in the spacious living room of his family's luxurious home. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a perfectly trimmed lawn. Championship trophies filled an entire glass cabinet. His father, Richard Carter, watched sports highlights from an oversized leather chair while answering business calls between commercials. Coach says scouts from 3 universities will be at Friday's game, Richard said without looking away from the television. Bryce smirked. They'll be impressed. They'd better be. His father finally lowered the remote. In this family, second place means you weren't prepared. Bryce had heard those words his entire life. Win. Dominate. Never appear weak. When Bryce was 12 years old and lost his first wrestling match, his father hadn't comforted him. He had simply said, if someone beats you once, make sure they never get another chance. The lesson had stayed with him. To Bryce, kindness looked like weakness. Patience looked like fear. Silence looked like surrender. That was exactly why Malik irritated him so much. Every insult, every shove, every public humiliation. Malik refused to react. It felt as though Bryce kept throwing punches into a wall made of quiet. Across town, 3 of Bryce's closest friends gathered in his basement. Pizza boxes covered the coffee table. A football game played on mute. Yet no one was watching. Tyler scrolled through his phone, laughing. The videos already got almost 5,000 views. He turned the screen around. The clip showed Malik kneeling to collect his books while laughter echoed around him. Comments flooded beneath it. Nerd got owned. What a coward. Bro didn't even defend himself. Bryce grinned. Told you. He's all brains. No backbone. Another friend, Mason, wasn't smiling. I don't know, man. What? He looked different today. Bryce rolled his eyes. Different. He wasn't scared. He just... Mason searched for the right word. Looked calm. Bryce snorted. That's because he's soft. Mason hesitated. My uncle teaches martial arts. He says the quiet ones are usually the dangerous ones. The room burst into laughter. Bryce leaned forward. You really think that kid? The one who spends lunch reading physics books? The one with taped-up glasses? You think he's dangerous? Even Mason smiled awkwardly. I guess not. Bryce tossed an empty soda can into the trash. Tomorrow. He pointed toward the screen showing Malik. I'm ending this. No more little jokes. No more pushing him around. I'm making sure the entire school remembers who runs Jefferson High. Tyler's eyes lit up. What are you gonna do? Bryce's grin slowly widened. Tomorrow after school. We're dragging him behind the gym. No teachers. No cameras. Just us. Someone whistled. Another pulled out his phone. We recording it? Bryce nodded. Oh, we're recording everything. He wanted the whole school to watch. He wanted Malik to beg. He wanted the quiet genius to finally cry. Because in Bryce's mind, that was what winning looked like. The next morning, Jefferson High buzzed with rumors before first period even began. Students whispered near their lockers. I heard Bryce is planning something. He's going after Malik again. My cousin saw them talking after football practice. Someone should tell a teacher. What's the point? They'll never believe Malik. Near the science building, a sophomore named Ethan overheard everything. He wasn't friends with Malik. They had only spoken twice. But Ethan remembered something from months earlier. When everyone else ignored him after his science project failed, Malik had stayed after school to help rebuild it. Without asking for credit. Without telling anyone. Ethan stared across the courtyard where Malik quietly organized books inside his repaired backpack. He wanted to warn him. His feet even started moving. Then Bryce appeared at the end of the hallway surrounded by 6 football players. The moment Ethan saw them, he stopped. Fear won again. Across the courtyard, Malik looked up briefly. Their eyes met for only a second. Ethan silently mouthed 2 words. Be careful. Malik gave him a gentle nod. Almost as if he already knew what was coming. And somewhere inside the old garage back home, hanging neatly on a wooden stand beneath his grandfather's faded photograph, a black belt waited in complete silence. By sunset, everyone at Jefferson High would finally understand what that belt truly meant. The last bell rang at exactly 3:15 p.m. Its sharp metallic echo rolled through Jefferson High like the release of a tightly wound spring. Lockers slammed shut. Classroom doors burst open. Students poured into the hallways, laughing, talking, already thinking about homework, football practice, or weekend plans. But beneath the ordinary rhythm of the afternoon, another current was moving. Whispers. They're doing it today. Behind the gym. Bryce is waiting. I heard the football team is going too. Phones quietly slipped into pockets, already set to record. Nobody announced where they were going. Yet dozens of students drifted toward the old practice field behind the gymnasium as if pulled by an invisible rope. The practice field hadn't been used in years. Cracked asphalt stretched beside an aging chain-link fence. Rust stained the abandoned bleachers. Tall oak trees surrounded the area, their golden autumn leaves dancing lazily in the afternoon breeze. It was the perfect place for something adults weren't supposed to see. Malik stepped out of the science building carrying his backpack over one shoulder. His repaired glasses still sat slightly crooked across his face. He noticed immediately. Too quiet. Normally students crowded the sidewalks toward the parking lot. Today, many stood still, watching him. Some looked guilty. Others looked frightened. No one smiled. As he crossed the courtyard, a freshman hurried toward him. Malik. The boy stopped, breathing hard. You shouldn't go home through the gym. Malik recognized him. His name was Ethan. The same sophomore whose science fair project he'd helped rebuild months earlier. Malik gave him a calm smile. Thank you. Ethan stared. You're not surprised? Malik looked toward the gymnasium. I've known since this morning. Then why are you going? For a brief moment, Malik remained silent. The afternoon wind rustled through the maple trees overhead. Finally, he answered. Because if I keep running, someone else will become their next target. Ethan didn't know what to say. He watched Malik continue walking alone. Every step steady. Every breath controlled. As though he wasn't walking toward danger, but toward a decision he had already made. Behind the gym, Bryce Carter waited with 6 members of the football team. Tyler leaned against a pickup truck parked beside the fence. Mason looked increasingly uncomfortable. Another teammate adjusted the camera on his phone. "We're live whenever you are." Bryce cracked his knuckles. Good. He wanted witnesses. He wanted everyone in school to remember this afternoon. As Malik rounded the corner, conversations immediately died. Dozens of students had gathered in a loose circle. No teachers. No security guards. Only teenagers. And silence. Bryce slowly stepped forward. "I was wondering if you'd show up." Malik stopped several feet away. "You asked me to." Bryce laughed. "You really do everything people tell you." Malik didn't answer. Bryce circled him slowly like a predator testing frightened prey. "You know, I've been thinking. Maybe I judged you too quickly." Several students exchanged confused looks. Bryce suddenly threw an arm around Malik's shoulders. "If you kneel down and apologize in front of everybody, I might leave you alone." The crowd waited. Phones continued recording. Malik gently removed Bryce's arm. "I'm not apologizing." The words weren't loud. They weren't angry. But they carried a quiet certainty that surprised everyone listening. Bryce's smile disappeared. "So, you've finally found a spine." He shoved Malik backward. Hard. Malik stumbled 2 steps, but kept his balance. No retaliation. No raised fists. Only steady breathing. Bryce shoved him again. Harder. "Fight back." Nothing. The third shove nearly knocked Malik into the chain-link fence. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Still, Malik refused to lift his hands. Inside his mind, another voice echoed instead. His grandfather's. Asterisk, the first victory belongs to the one who avoids violence. Asterisk, asterisk, the second belongs to the one who protects others. Asterisk, asterisk, only fools celebrate the third. Asterisk. Malik slowly inhaled. He could smell dry leaves. Cold metal. Fresh cut grass from the nearby football field. He closed his eyes for less than a second. Then opened them again. Calm. Focused. Bryce mistook that calm for surrender. He laughed loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I knew it. You're scared." Before Malik could respond, a frightened voice cried out behind the crowd. "Stop." Everyone turned. A small freshman girl pushed through the students. She couldn't have been older than 14. Her backpack was almost as large as she was. She stood trembling between Bryce and Malik. "Please, just leave him alone." Bryce stared at her in disbelief. Then he laughed. "You think you're going to save him?" The girl didn't move. Her knees shook. But she stayed where she was. Bryce's expression hardened. Without warning, he shoved her aside. She lost her balance. Her head struck the corner of a concrete bench with a sickening crack. The sound froze the entire crowd. The girl's books scattered across the ground. Blood slowly trickled down the side of her forehead. For the first time that afternoon, the calm disappeared from Malik's eyes. He dropped his backpack, took one deliberate step forward, and in a voice quieter than the falling leaves, he said something no one there would ever forget. "You've had every chance to walk away. You don't get another one." At that exact moment, Bryce swung the first punch. Bryce's fist tore through the cold afternoon air. Several students instinctively flinched. Others raised their phones even higher, determined to capture the moment they believed would become the most humiliating video Jefferson High had ever seen. Malik didn't move. Not yet. The punch stopped barely an inch from his face. Bryce had expected panic. He had expected Malik to throw his hands over his head. He had expected tears. Instead, Malik simply looked at him. His breathing remained slow, measured, almost peaceful. The silence unsettled Bryce more than any insult could have. "What?" Bryce barked. "You finally too scared to blink?" No answer. Only those steady brown eyes. Eyes that weren't filled with fear. They were studying him, watching the rhythm of his shoulders, the position of his feet, the tightening muscles in his forearms. Years of karate training had taught Malik that a fight often ended before the first strike landed. Your opponent always revealed himself first. Bryce couldn't understand why the boy in front of him seemed so calm. So he did what angry people often do. He became louder. You think you're better than me because you get good grades? Another shove. You think everyone feels sorry for you? A second shove. You think you're some kind of hero? He shoved Malik so hard that his backpack slid several feet across the cracked pavement. Inside it, a small framed photograph slipped onto the ground. The glass cracked. A faded picture stared back from inside. A younger Malik, standing beside an elderly man in a white karate gi. The words beneath the picture were barely readable. Regional Karate Championship, first place, no one noticed. Except Ethan. The freshman quietly bent down, picked up the damaged frame, and stared. His eyes widened. Guys. His voice was barely above a whisper. I think. No one heard him. Bryce had already grabbed Malik by the hoodie again. You've got one last chance. Kneel. And tell everybody I'm stronger. Malik slowly looked toward the frightened freshman girl sitting against the concrete bench. A teacher still hadn't arrived. Blood continued running down the side of her face. She was trying not to cry. That sight changed something inside him. Not into anger. Into responsibility. His grandfather's voice echoed inside his mind. Asterisk, karate exists to protect life. Asterisk, asterisk, never your pride. Asterisk. Malik gently removed Bryce's hand from his hoodie. His movement was so smooth that Bryce barely realized it had happened. I'm asking you one final time. Walk away. Bryce burst into laughter. You? Giving me orders? The football players behind him joined in. Someone shouted, hit him already. Another yelled, knock the nerd out. The crowd pressed closer. Phones continued recording. Some students looked excited. Others looked terrified. Mason swallowed hard. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. He had watched enough wrestling matches to recognize balance. Malik wasn't standing like someone waiting to be attacked. He was standing exactly like the martial artists his uncle coached every weekend. Feet shoulder-width apart. Hands relaxed. Eyes focused. No wasted movement. No tension. Just control. Mason quietly stepped toward Bryce. Dude, I think we should stop. Bryce shoved him backward without even turning around. Stay out of this. He rolled his shoulders. Cracked his neck. Raised both fists. Let's see if the genius can bleed. Then he charged. Fast. Much faster than anyone expected. A heavy right hook exploded toward Malik's jaw. Gasps erupted. Several girls covered their mouths. The punch never landed. In one effortless motion, Malik shifted half a step to the left. Nothing more. Bryce's fist sliced through empty air. His own momentum carried him forward. Before anyone understood what had happened, Malik placed one open hand lightly against Bryce's shoulder. Not a strike. Just a redirect. Bryce stumbled 3 steps past him, nearly falling to one knee. The crowd fell completely silent. What? Bryce turned around, confused. You missed. Someone whispered. No. Another student corrected. He made him miss. Bryce's face turned bright red. Humiliation burned hotter than anger. You got lucky. He rushed forward again. This time throwing 3 punches in rapid succession. Left. Right. Left. Each one missed. Not because Malik was faster. Because he moved less. 1. Small pivot. A slight lean. A quiet step backward. Nothing dramatic. Nothing flashy. Every movement looked almost effortless. The crowd's excitement slowly transformed into disbelief. Phones that had been recording to laugh were now recording because no one could believe what they were seeing. Bryce stopped breathing normally. His shoulders rose and fell. Sweat appeared across his forehead despite the cool autumn air. Meanwhile, Malik hadn't thrown a single punch. Not one. His hands remained open. Calm. Patient. As though he still hoped this fight could end without anyone getting hurt. Bryce pointed at him with a trembling finger. Fight me. Malik shook his head. I don't want to hurt you. The words ignited Bryce's pride like gasoline meeting fire. With a furious scream, he spun toward the baseball equipment rack beside the practice field. His hand closed around an aluminum bat. The metallic sound echoed across the abandoned court. Every face in the crowd went pale. Someone screamed. Another student dropped their phone. Even Tyler took one frightened step backward. Because this was no longer bullying. This had become something far more dangerous. Malik slowly exhaled. For the first time that afternoon, his hands rose into a traditional karate guard. Low, relaxed, disciplined. Across the practice field, the autumn wind suddenly fell still. And every student watching instinctively realized the same thing. The real fight had only just begun. The aluminum bat caught the late afternoon sunlight. For one terrifying moment, nobody breathed. Bryce gripped the handle with both hands, his chest rising and falling as anger drowned out every ounce of reason he had left. The laughter that had filled the abandoned practice court only minutes earlier had vanished completely. Someone whispered, "He's actually going to use it." Another student slowly lowered their phone. This wasn't funny anymore. This wasn't another school prank. This had become something none of them had expected. Malik didn't move. The cool breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves across the cracked asphalt as he quietly shifted his weight onto the balls of his feet. His hands rose, not into an aggressive boxing stance, but into a traditional karate guard. Open palms. Relaxed shoulders. Steady breathing. Nothing about him suggested he wanted to fight. Everything about him suggested he was prepared if he had no other choice. Across the crowd, Ethan clutched the cracked photograph he had picked up from the ground. His eyes kept drifting between the old championship picture and the young man standing in front of Bryce. Now he understood. Malik hadn't been weak. He had been patient. Bryce laughed, though the sound came out strained. "What? You finally decided to fight?" Malik slowly shook his head. "No." Bryce frowned. "No, I'm deciding to protect people." The words landed with surprising weight. Not loud. Not dramatic. Simply true. Bryce's face twisted with rage. "You think you're better than me?" "No. You think you're stronger?" Malik looked at the frightened freshman girl still sitting beside the concrete bench, one hand pressed against the cut on her forehead while another student tried to comfort her. Then he answered quietly, "I'm trying to make sure no one else gets hurt." For a brief second, something flickered across Bryce's face. Not guilt. Confusion. He couldn't understand someone choosing protection over revenge. His father had never taught him that strength looked like mercy. A dry leaf drifted between them. The entire courtyard seemed frozen in time. Far away, the school flag fluttered lazily above the administration building. Somewhere beyond the football field, a whistle echoed from soccer practice. Life continued. Yet for everyone standing behind the gym, the world had narrowed to two teenagers standing 10 feet apart. One fueled by anger, the other anchored by discipline. Malik slowly closed his eyes. Only for a heartbeat. Inside his mind, another place appeared. Not the practice field. Not the shouting students. Instead, an old wooden dojo. Rain tapping softly against a tin roof. The smell of polished cedar and worn tatami mats. His grandfather stood across from him wearing a faded white gi, his hands folded behind his back. Again, Samuel had said years earlier. 12-year-old Malik had attacked with everything he had. Punches. Kicks. Frustration. Samuel never struck back. He only stepped aside. Redirected. Waited. Finally, the exhausted boy had collapsed onto the mat. "I don't understand," young Malik gasped. "You never fight." Samuel smiled. "I do." "When?" "Long before the first punch." The old man knelt beside him. "A true martial artist wins the hardest battle first." "What battle?" "The battle against himself." Samuel gently tapped the black belt tied around Malik's waist. "This doesn't mean you know how to hurt someone. It means you have learned when not to." The memory faded. Malik opened his eyes. His breathing remained slow. Steady. The chaos around him no longer reached his mind. Bryce roared, then charged. The aluminum bat cut violently through the air toward Malik's shoulder. Gasps erupted. Several students screamed. Time seemed to slow. Instead of stepping backward, Malik stepped forward. One precise movement. His left hand guided Bryce's wrist, just enough to redirect the swing harmlessly past his body. his right palm pressed lightly against Bryce's elbow. Not striking. Controlling. The bat slipped free. It clanged loudly across the pavement before spinning to a stop several yards away. Bryce stumbled forward, completely off balance. Before he could recover, Malik gently caught him by the jacket, preventing him from smashing face-first into the concrete. The entire crowd stood frozen. No kick. No punch. No knockout. Malik had protected the very person trying to hurt him. Bryce stared in disbelief. You. His voice trembled. You could have. Malik slowly released him. Yes, I could have. Silence settled over the practice field. Even the wind seemed unwilling to interrupt it. The students looked from Bryce, to the bat, to Malik's calm expression. Everything they believed about strength suddenly felt incomplete. Malik bent down, picked up the aluminum bat, walked a few steps, and quietly placed it back on the equipment rack exactly where it belonged. No celebration. No triumphant pose. Only quiet respect. Then he turned back toward Bryce. I told you. I didn't want to hurt you. Those simple words struck harder than any punch ever could. And just as Bryce struggled to understand what had happened, a firm voice echoed across the practice field. What is going on here? Every head turned. Standing at the edge of the crowd was Principal Anderson. Beside him stood an elderly man leaning on a polished wooden cane. Samuel Johnson, Malik's grandfather. His eyes swept across the silent students, then settled on the black belt embroidered beneath the collar of Malik's hoodie. Without saying another word, the old master's expression told everyone present that he had seen enough. Principal Anderson's voice sliced through the stunned silence. What happened here? No one answered. For nearly 10 seconds, the abandoned practice field remained completely still. The autumn breeze stirred the scattered notebook pages lying across the cracked pavement, but the dozens of students standing in a wide circle looked as though they had forgotten how to move. Bryce Carter was still trying to process what had just happened. His chest heaved. His right hand trembled. Not because he had been hit. Because he hadn't. He slowly looked toward the aluminum bat resting harmlessly on the equipment rack. Then toward Malik. Then back to his own empty hands. For the first time in years, Bryce realized someone had defeated him without trying to. Principal Anderson pushed through the crowd. His eyes immediately found the frightened freshman girl sitting against the concrete bench while another student pressed a sweater against the cut on her forehead. Call an ambulance. His voice was calm but firm. Now. A teacher standing nearby immediately reached for her phone. Only then did the principal turn toward Bryce. What happened? Bryce opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Tyler looked down. Mason refused to make eye contact. The football players who had cheered only minutes earlier suddenly seemed fascinated by the ground beneath their shoes. No one wanted to speak. Because everyone knew. The truth was ugly. Before Principal Anderson could ask another question, another sound interrupted the silence. A familiar electronic chime. Then another. And another. Nearly every student's phone vibrated at once. Messages flooded across social media. Videos. Different angles. Different recordings. Every shove. Every insult. Every threat. Every moment Bryce had cornered Malik. The entire confrontation had been captured from beginning to end, including the moment Bryce picked up the aluminum bat. A sophomore quietly whispered, "It's everywhere." Within minutes, students from inside the school were already watching the clips. Parents began receiving them. Teachers' phones buzzed. Even the district office had been tagged. This wasn't one video anymore. It had become undeniable evidence. Principal Anderson held out his hand. Bryce, your phone. Bryce obeyed without arguing. The principal watched the recording from the beginning. The courtyard. The insults. The pushing. The terrified freshman girl. The bat. Then, the moment everything changed. He watched Malik step inside the swing. Redirect the attack. Catch Bryce before he hit the concrete. Place the bat back onto the rack. The principal replayed those few seconds twice. Then he slowly lowered the phone. His expression had completely changed. He looked at Malik. Did you strike him? No, sir. Did you attempt to injure him? No, sir. Did you intentionally provoke this confrontation? No, sir. Malik's answers were short, respectful, honest. The principal nodded once. I can see that. At that moment, Samuel Johnson slowly walked forward, leaning on his polished wooden cane. Many students had never seen him before. To them he looked like an ordinary elderly man. Silver hair. Simple brown jacket. Gentle eyes. Nothing remarkable. Until Coach Ramirez suddenly froze. His eyes widened. No way. The football coach stepped closer. Sir, were you? Samuel smiled politely. I used to teach. Coach Ramirez turned toward the students. His voice carried genuine disbelief. You kids have no idea who this man is. Years ago, before coaching football, Ramirez had trained in karate. He had never forgotten the name Samuel Johnson. The man standing before them had produced multiple state champions, several national competitors, one former Olympic alternate. Ramirez looked toward Malik. He's your grandfather? Yes, sir. And he trained you? Malik nodded quietly. Ramirez let out a slow breath. That explains everything. Principal Anderson looked confused. Explains what? Ramirez pointed toward Malik. Did you notice something? He never threw a punch. The principal frowned. Ramirez continued. He never kicked. He never counterattacked. He only protected. The coach stepped into the open space where the fight had happened moments earlier. If Malik wanted to hurt Bryce, he looked directly at Bryce. This fight would have ended in less than 3 seconds. A wave of whispers spread through the crowd. 3 seconds? Impossible. Coach Ramirez slowly shook his head. You don't understand. I've seen black belt demonstrations for over 20 years. What you witnessed wasn't luck. It wasn't instinct. It was discipline. He looked back toward Samuel. Sir, how old was he when he earned his black belt? Samuel answered quietly. 14. Gasps echoed across the practice field. Someone nearly dropped their phone. Another student whispered 14. Samuel nodded. He became the youngest regional black belt champion our academy had ever certified. The whispers grew louder. The youngest? No wonder. I thought he couldn't fight. I thought he was scared. Samuel gently smiled. No. He was afraid of becoming the kind of person who enjoys hurting others. Those words settled over the students like a heavy blanket. For the first time, many of them replayed every moment they had laughed while Malik was being humiliated. Not one of those laughs felt funny anymore. Bryce stared at Malik. His mind returned to one sentence Malik had spoken before the fight. Asterisk, I don't want to hurt you. Asterisk, he finally understood. It hadn't been arrogance. It had been mercy. And somehow, that realization hurt far more than any punch ever could. Just then, the sound of approaching police sirens echoed beyond the school parking lot. The consequences everyone had tried to avoid had finally arrived. The flashing red and blue lights reflected across the windows of Jefferson High. Students instinctively stepped farther back as 2 police officers and a school resource officer crossed the practice field. The ambulance arrived moments later, and paramedics immediately knelt beside the injured freshman girl. Fortunately, the wound on her forehead looked worse than it was. She would need several stitches. Nothing more. As the paramedics carefully lifted her onto a stretcher, she searched the crowd until she found Malik. Their eyes met. Thank you, she whispered. If you hadn't stepped in. Her voice broke before she could finish. Malik simply smiled. I'm glad you're okay. He never mentioned the bat. He never mentioned Bryce. He never spoke about himself. Principal Anderson slowly turned toward Bryce. Bryce Carter. You're suspended immediately. His voice remained calm. Pending the school board's review, this incident may result in permanent expulsion. Bryce lowered his head. For once, he had nothing to argue. His father, Richard Carter, arrived less than 20 minutes later. The powerful businessman stepped out of his black SUV wearing an expensive suit, clearly expecting another minor complaint that money or influence could solve. What happened? No one answered immediately. Principal Anderson simply handed him a tablet. The security footage. Richard watched in silence. At first his jaw remained tight. Then his expression slowly changed. He watched his son mock Malik, kick his glasses, shove him repeatedly, threaten him. He watched the frightened freshman girl get thrown into the concrete bench. Finally, he watched Malik disarm Bryce, catch him before he fell, return the bat. Richard replayed those few seconds 3 times. When the video ended, he didn't look at the principal. He looked at his son. "Is this who you've become?" Bryce couldn't answer. His father had always demanded that he be the strongest. Today, for the first time, Richard realized he had forgotten to teach him how to be good. The crowd remained unusually quiet. Many students expected Malik to celebrate. Some expected him to insult Bryce. Others imagined years of bottled-up anger finally exploding. Instead, Malik walked over to the bench where Bryce sat with his head lowered. Several football players instinctively stepped aside. Bryce couldn't even lift his eyes. His voice cracked. "I'm sorry." The words were barely audible. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know why I hated you." Malik remained silent for a long moment. The autumn breeze carried another shower of golden leaves across the practice field. Finally he spoke. "My grandfather once told me something." Bryce slowly looked up. People who try hardest to make others feel small usually feel the smallest inside. Bryce felt his throat tighten. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Not with anger. Not with pity. With understanding. Tears quietly gathered in his eyes. "I don't know how to fix what I did." Malik looked toward the football field where younger students were now watching from a distance. "You can't change yesterday." He paused. "But you decide who you become tomorrow." Samuel Johnson slowly approached the 2 boys. His cane tapped softly against the pavement. He stopped beside Bryce. For a moment, the old karate master simply studied him. Then he untied the worn white belt wrapped around an old practice bag he had carried with him. He placed it gently into Bryce's hands. Bryce looked confused. "A white belt?" Samuel smiled. "Every black belt begins here." The old master's eyes were kind. Not because it represents skill. Because it represents humility. The courage to admit you still have much to learn. Bryce stared down at the belt. His hands trembled. No one had ever offered him a second chance after his worst mistake. Malik had. Samuel had. Neither of them owed him that kindness. Yet both chose it anyway. A week later, Jefferson High gathered for a special assembly. Principal Anderson addressed the students. He spoke about bullying, about courage, about choosing compassion over popularity. Then he invited one final person onto the stage. Malik Johnson. The auditorium erupted into applause. Malik walked slowly to the microphone. He looked across hundreds of students. Many had laughed at him only days earlier. Now they waited in complete silence. He could have told them about karate, about championships, about discipline. Instead, he said only one sentence. "The strongest person in any room is the one who gives others a reason to stand up instead of bow their heads." No one applauded immediately. The silence itself carried more respect than applause ever could. If this story touched your heart, remember this. True strength is measured not by the people you can defeat, but by the people you choose to protect. At the back of the auditorium, Bryce quietly stood. Then, before anyone else moved, he began clapping. One pair of hands, then another. Within seconds, the entire school rose to its feet. Not to celebrate a fighter, but to honor a young man who had proven that the greatest victory is mastering yourself before trying to conquer anyone else. 6 months later, spring arrived quietly in Jefferson. The maple trees lining the streets that had once shed their golden autumn leaves now stretched toward a bright blue sky, their branches covered in fresh green buds. Morning sunlight spilled across the windows of Jefferson High School, warming the brick walls that had witnessed one of the most unforgettable afternoons in the school's history. Students still remembered the video, not because it had gone viral, but because it had changed something inside the people who had watched it. The recording had eventually disappeared from social media. What remained was the lesson. Teachers noticed fewer students laughing when someone was embarrassed. Freshmen walked the hallways with a little more confidence. Even the school's anonymous bullying reports had dropped dramatically. One act of restraint had quietly reshaped an entire community. Inside the old gymnasium, another transformation was taking place. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, a new after-school self-defense club gathered on the polished wooden floor. The banner hanging above the entrance read, "Strength through respect." Nearly 40 students attended regularly. Some came to learn self-defense. Some came because they lacked confidence. Others simply wanted a place where nobody laughed at them. At the center of the room stood Malik Johnson. Still wearing simple glasses. Still carrying books under one arm. Still speaking softly enough that everyone leaned forward to listen. He wore a plain white karate gi with a neatly tied black belt. There was nothing flashy about him. No trophies displayed. No dramatic speeches. Only quiet confidence. Today's lesson wasn't about punching. It wasn't about kicking. Instead, Malik asked everyone to pair up. When your partner pushes you, don't push back. The students exchanged confused looks. Malik smiled. Help them regain their balance. Several teenagers frowned. One finally asked, wouldn't that let them win? Malik gently shook his head. No. It reminds both of you that no one has to lose. Across the room, Samuel Johnson watched from a folding chair near the wall. Age had slowed his body, but not his eyes. He quietly smiled. The boy he had raised wasn't simply teaching karate anymore. He was passing on a way of living. Near the entrance stood another familiar face. Bryce Carter. Life had changed for him too. His suspension had ended months earlier after completing counseling, community service, and a restorative justice program approved by the school board. The football scholarship offers he'd once dreamed about had disappeared. Some people called that punishment. Bryce no longer did. He called it a second beginning. Instead of leading teammates through weightlifting drills, he now arrived early every Tuesday to arrange practice mats and sweep the gym floor before anyone else came. Nobody asked him to. He simply did it. One of the younger students accidentally dropped a box of training pads. Bryce immediately knelt to help gather them. The boy hesitated. Weren't you the football captain? Bryce smiled awkwardly. I used to think that title mattered. He handed the student the last pad. This one matters more. The boy looked confused. What? The chance to become someone better. After practice ended, the students slowly drifted home beneath the warm evening sky. Malik remained behind, carefully folding the practice mats. Bryce walked over carrying 2 water bottles. Without saying a word, he handed one to Malik. Thanks. Malik accepted it with a smile. For a while, neither of them spoke. They simply watched the sunset pour golden light through the gym windows. Finally, Bryce broke the silence. You know, I still think about that day. Malik looked toward him. The day behind the gym. Bryce nodded. I always thought the moment that changed my life was when you took the bat away. He paused. But I was wrong. Malik waited. Bryce looked down at his hands. The moment that changed me was when you caught me before I hit the ground. His voice grew quiet. You protected me from myself. Malik didn't answer immediately. Instead, he remembered his grandfather's words. A black belt is not permission to fight, it is responsibility. He finally smiled. We all fall. The important thing is what we become after. Someone helps us back up. Bryce's eyes glistened. He simply nodded. Outside, Samuel waited beneath the blooming maple tree with his old wooden cane. As the 2 boys walked toward him together, he noticed something that made him smile. Months earlier, one of them had walked several steps ahead. The other had followed behind, surrounded by fear. Now, they walked side by side. Not because they had forgotten the past. Because they had chosen a different future. Samuel looked up at the evening sky. The last rays of sunlight painted the clouds in shades of gold and amber. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Words were no longer necessary. The gentle breeze carried laughter from children playing across the nearby park. Birds settled into the trees. Somewhere in the distance, the school bell rang one final time before the campus closed for the evening. Malik quietly adjusted the cracked black-framed glasses he had repaired instead of replacing. Bryce noticed them. "You never bought new ones?" Malik smiled. "No. They remind me that broken things don't always need to be thrown away." Bryce looked away, blinking back tears. He knew Malik wasn't talking about glasses anymore. The camera slowly pulled back. 3 figures stood beneath the maple tree. An old master, a young black belt, a former bully learning humility. The sunset wrapped them in warm light as their shadows stretched across the quiet sidewalk. No cheering, no trophies, no revenge. Only peace. Because real strength was never hidden inside a fist. It had always lived inside the heart that chose compassion when revenge would have been easier. Kindness isn't weakness, it's the strongest black belt anyone can ever earn.